Okay, just going straight on. We're talking about what states would we use for this problem. Trying to find see if we can find the substring 001 in a string, in input string. Okay, so yeah, we're trying to decide which states. That's often the main problem, because then once you've decided the states, the transitions between them become fairly obvious. So the real heart in the decision making, in the design process for an automaton, is deciding the states. So let's have a state for we have found the first zero in the substring. We'll have another state for we have found the second zero in the substring. In other words, we have found two consecutive, important, 0, 0. We found two consecutive zeros in the substring, and we have another state that corresponds to we have found the third symbol in the substring. In other words, the 1. So in other words, we have found three consecutive symbols, 0, 0, 1. Okay? And once we get into that third state, the 0, 0, 1 state, we just stay there, because we've done the job. We've found the substring, and so no matter what comes in after that, it doesn't matter. So we just keep looping back to that state that corresponds to 0, 0, 1. All right. Now what I've just been saying. So we'll have a state that corresponds. You found the first 0. We'll have another state that corresponds to we found the second 0, and we'll have a third state that corresponds to we found the third symbol, which is a 1. So we've found 0, 0, 1. Now there's another possibility, like how do you start? You have to start in some state, right? Now you can't start any of these because we haven't read anything yet. Okay, so let's have a kind of starting state that corresponds to having not read anything, that you start there. And if your string, if at the beginning there's a whole bunch of 1s before you come to your first 0, then in this starting state, let's just call it Q, you just keep looping back to Q. As each time you read another 1, an initial 1, 1, 1, 1, before you come to your first 0, then just keep looping back to Q, right? Until you come to your first 1. So we'll have 4 states that correspond to, like your starting state. You haven't read any symbols yet. Your second state will be, that'll correspond to when you see a 0. I was going to say that means prior to it was a 1, but that wouldn't be true if you're just starting. Anyway, so if you've seen a 1, you go into that. Sorry, a 0, you go into that state. And if you then see a 0, but it happens to be your second 0, immediately after the previous one being a 0, then you're in this state. And then if you see a 1 after 0 and 0, you're in this third state. Okay? So, and this is the start state plus these 3 states. So we've got 4 states. So let's call them Q, the start state. You haven't read anything yet. Q0 corresponds to, you've seen a 0. Q00, that means you've now seen your second consecutive 0. And the 4th state would be Q001, which means corresponds to you've seen now 3 consecutive symbols 001. Alright? So here they are listed. Okay, now we can start. So we've decided on the states. Now we can talk about the transitions. And usually that's an easier task. The harder creative part is deciding on the states. Yeah, I think so. It seems my experience anyway. Alright. Okay, so if we're in state Q, right? We're just beginning, right? And we read a 1, we'll just loop back to Q, right? So yeah, we can keep doing that, and you just keep reading off the 1, 1, 1, 1, and you just stay in Q until you read your first 0. Okay? So if you're in state Q, not this one, you're here in your starting state, and if you read your first 0, if you read a 0, then go to Q0, right? So you switch, you transition to this state, Q0. And what is Q0, that state, what does it mean? Well, it means that you've found your a 0. Okay? So you're now here. Right? So imagine now you're in that state, Q0, and then you read a 1. Well, that means you're not, it's not of this form. If you go 0, 1, that doesn't help. Okay? Go back to Q, in other words, right? Because you might have a series of 1s. So if you're in Q0 and you read a 1, if your next symbol is a 1, then go back to Q, like the start state, right? But if you read a 0, now you're in Q0, remember, that means the previous symbol was 0. And now you read another 0. So that means you read 2 consecutive zeros. So switch to this state, this one. Okay, switch to that. Right? Okay, now imagine you're in this state. And say you read a 1. Ooh, well, that means you've succeeded in your task. Okay, well then you'll switch to this fourth state, because you've now read 001. If you're in this state, that means you have read, either just now or in the past, 3 consecutive symbols, 001. The substring you're trying to detect. Right? Okay, so if you're in state Q00 and you read, next symbol you read is 1, so switch, transition to this state, Q001. But if you read a 0, now you're in state Q00, right? And you read a 0, what are you going to do? I mean, think about it. So you've now, for example, this might be your third 0. Well, stay in Q00. Why? Because the next symbol might be a 1. It's possible, right? But if it's not, well, still stay in Q00, because the next symbol might be a 1, and so on, using that logic. Okay? So, so just stay in Q00. All right. Now, if you are in Q001, in other words, you've found the substring, then it doesn't matter what you read. If it's 0 or 1, it doesn't matter. Just stay in that state. Why? Because when I was saying this a bit earlier, when you finish reading the input stream, you will be, if you're staying in that state, you will end in that state. Okay? And that means you have ended in an accept state. And therefore, since you've now finished, as you, the automaton, now that you have finished reading the input string, your decision you will output, given that you have ended, your final state is an accept state, well there's only one, then you will output the decision accept. Right? So the transitions from this state, Q001, will be back to itself, and it doesn't matter if it's a 0 or a 1. Okay? So start state's Q, the accept state will be this one, right? And I'll draw the state diagram, state transition diagram here. Okay, so start state, and so here's your starting arrow, here's your accept state, right? So just summarizing quickly, we've done it verbally already, but just give you a kind of summary of the state diagram, state transition diagram. Okay, so start here, you read a 1. Well, that's not interesting. So just stay there. Okay, so 1 just loops you back. Now, if you read a 0, that means you've read your first 0 of the 3 potential 3 characters. So you transition now to state Q0. That means you've read a 0, right? Now you're now here. Well, so you will read either, next you'll either read a 0 or a 1. If you read a 0, you've now read 2 zeros, so you go to this state, right? Q0. But if you're here and you read a 1, well, that means you've broken the possibility of having a 0, 0, 1. So you go back to the start state and start again, in a sense. Okay. Now, if you're in Q0 and you read a 0, well, from what we were saying before, you don't go back, just stay there, because it's possible the next symbol you read will be a 0. Okay? Sorry, a 1. And then